Why was the laughter always louder when she walked by? The afternoon heat pressed against the walls of Fort Jackson, but the noise spilling from the men's locker room burned hotter. Sarah Martinez slowed her steps, pretending she'd forgotten something, pretending she didn't hear them. Yet every word hit like shrapnel. Did you see Martinez today? Thought she was gonna pass out on the obstacle course. A wave of laughter, sharp, familiar, the kind that never ended with a smile. She tightened her grip on her duffel and forced herself to breathe. She finished that course faster than most of them, but truth never echoed in that room, only insecurity dressed as jokes. Her hand hovered over the handle of the women's locker room. She told herself it didn't matter. She said those words so many times they'd almost lost meaning. Then she pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled of soap and fatigue. 3 other recruits were already changing out of their uniforms, their movements quiet, mechanical. Maria Lopez looked up first. "Don't listen to them," she said softly, shaking her head. "They're just scared you'll outshoot them again." Sarah managed a thin smile. She wanted to believe it was that simple. But every day the jokes grew meaner. Every day the silence afterward lasted longer. She sat on the wooden bench and began unlacing her boots, each pull snapping like a heartbeat. In her chest, determination warred with doubt. She had trained for this. She had dreamed of this. And yet, standing among soldiers who refused to see her as one of them, she felt the old question rise again. What if they're right? When she was little, her grandfather's voice used to fill their small kitchen in New Mexico. "Strength," he would tell her, "isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's who keeps going when no one's watching." He had fought in Vietnam. She still kept his tarnished dog tags in her locker, her reminder that honor wasn't given. It was earned inch by inch, through grit and silence. Jessica Torres, another recruit, plopped down beside her and nudged her shoulder. "They talk because they're threatened. You don't have to prove anything." But Sarah wasn't so sure. Every sneer, every whisper chipped away at something she didn't want to admit was fragile. That night she opened the small notebook she kept hidden under her pillow. Day 127, completed advanced marksmanship with highest score. Led navigation drill, still no respect from peers. Remember why I'm here. She underlined the last sentence twice, then closed the notebook like sealing a promise. When footsteps echoed behind her, she looked up. Sergeant Brooks stood in the doorway, his broad silhouette framed by the dim light of the corridor. "Martinez," he said, "my office, 800, dress uniform." Her stomach dropped. "Yes, Sergeant." He gave no explanation, only a nod before disappearing down the hall. That night she barely slept. Every possible scenario ran through her mind. Had she overstepped when she'd corrected Private Johnson's formation error yesterday? Had someone filed a complaint? By dawn, she was already polishing her brass buttons until her reflection stared back in perfect symmetry. Her hands trembled once, only once, before she steadied them. The walk to Brooks's office felt longer than any run she'd done in training. Her footsteps echoed against the corridor tiles, precise, rehearsed. "Come in," his voice called when she knocked. She entered and froze. A woman stood by the window in an officer's uniform, rank insignia glinting under the morning light. Major Catherine Reynolds. "Private Martinez," the major said without turning, "at ease." Sarah obeyed, pulse hammering. Reynolds faced her. Her expression was calm, measured, eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. "Sergeant Brooks tells me you've been causing quite a stir around here." Sarah's breath caught. "Ma'am, if I—" Reynolds lifted a hand. "Relax, Martinez, not that kind of stir." Brooks slid a file across the desk. "Your scores," he said simply. "Top 2%. Tactical assessments outstanding. Leadership potential off the charts." Sarah blinked. "Thank you, Sergeant." Major Reynolds studied her as though trying to see beyond her uniform. "Why did you enlist, Martinez?" "To serve my country, ma'am. My grandfather taught me that freedom demands sacrifice. Reynolds nodded slowly. A noble answer, but I think there's more to it. What are you trying to prove? The question sliced through Sarah's practiced composure. For a moment, she considered giving another formal response, but something in the Major's eyes invited honesty. I want to prove that what we're capable of shouldn't depend on gender, ma'am. That women can lead, fight, and command just as well as anyone else. A silence stretched between them. Then Reynolds smiled faintly. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Brooks leaned back in his chair. There's a new program starting, classified. 12 candidates from across all branches. It's called the Advanced Leadership Development Program. Sarah frowned. I've never heard of it. You're not supposed to, Reynolds said. It doesn't officially exist, not yet. She crossed to a wall map peppered with pins. It's an experimental command initiative, training exceptional female soldiers for combat leadership. Accelerated, brutal, controversial. If you complete it, you'll go straight to officer candidate school and into real command positions. Sarah's heart pounded. What would be required of me? Everything, Reynolds replied. And confidentiality, you leave today. No farewells, no explanations. Officially, you're on emergency family leave. Brooks met her gaze. You'll be watched every second. If any of you fail, the entire program will be shut down, and every critic will use it to keep women out of command for another generation. Sarah stood motionless, the room suddenly too small for the magnitude of the choice before her. Do I have time to think about it? Reynolds shook her head. Transport lifts in 30 minutes. Decide now. 30 minutes to choose between safety and purpose, between invisibility and history. She thought of her grandfather's trembling hands holding her enlistment photo. Mija, he'd said, you have heart, courage, intelligence. The Army needs all three. Sarah looked up. I accept, ma'am. When do we leave? Reynolds' smile was brief but real. Now. The helicopter blades carved through humid air as Fort Jackson shrank beneath them. Clouds drifted low, their shadows crawling across endless forests. Major Reynolds shouted over the rotors, You're headed to Camp Athena, a former CIA site in Virginia. Remote. Secure. You'll train harder than you ever thought possible. Sarah watched the world unfold below, rivers twisting like veins of silver, mountains standing like sentinels. For the first time in months, she felt the laughter of Fort Jackson fatting behind her. They chose 12 of us, she asked. From every branch, all exceptional. But remember, Martinez, this isn't about being exceptional. It's about proving that women belong where decisions are made. When they landed, the air smelled of pine and cold stone. The facility looked more like a university than a base, modern buildings linked by narrow paths, distant gunfire echoing from training ranges. A staff sergeant escorted her to a modest room, bed, desk, closet, and a schedule on the pillow. 500 physical training, 800 tactical analysis, 1,000 leadership simulation, 1,400 command presence workshop. She traced the list with her finger, half awed, half terrified. That evening the dining hall buzzed with low conversation. 11 other women sat at long tables, each radiating a quiet intensity. Captain Lisa Chen, combat medic, 3-tour Afghanistan. Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez, intelligence, 6 languages. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Williams, EOD technician. They shared stories of the obstacles they'd faced, the ceilings they'd cracked. When Sarah mentioned she was still technically a recruit, Captain Chen smiled. Then you've already beaten the odds. They picked you for a reason. The door opened and silence rippled through the room. Colonel Patricia Hayes entered, silver hair, presence like a blade. Ladies, she said, her voice echoing off the walls, enjoy your meal. It's the last easy one you'll have. Forks froze midair. Tomorrow your training begins. Some of you won't make it. That's fine, better to fail here than in command. Understand this, you're not here because someone wants you to succeed. You're here because powerful people expect you to fail. Don't give them that satisfaction. Her gaze swept across their faces, lingering on Sarah. Prove them wrong. That night Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like whispered orders. She thought of every sneer, every dismissive laugh. They echoed now not as wounds but as fuel. In the morning, the bugle shattered the silence at 500 sharp. The run through the mountain trails was 5 miles of pure punishment. Every incline burned, every breath cut. But quitting wasn't an option, not anymore. Afterward, they launched into tactical drills that felt less like lessons and more like war compressed into hours. She learned to analyze real battle footage, to break down command errors, to recognize the fragile line between bravery and recklessness. By afternoon came the command presence workshop. The instructor, a retired Special Forces colonel, paced before them. Authority, he barked, isn't volume, it's conviction, it's calm. When you know your craft better than anyone else, when your voice doesn't shake even when your hands do, people follow. Sarah practiced issuing orders, taking pushback, holding eye contact until uncertainty melted. Each repetition stripped away the timid recruit she'd been. That night she sat alone in the mess hall, her muscles trembling with exhaustion, her mind strangely alive. Here no one laughed behind locker room doors. Here, failure wasn't gendered, it was universal. For the first time since she'd enlisted, she felt like she belonged. She closed her eyes and whispered the words her grandfather had given her like a prayer. Strength isn't loud. Outside, the camp lights flickered against the dark ridge line, and somewhere deep inside her, a quiet certainty took root, one that would soon be tested beyond anything she imagined. Why did her heart pound harder now than it ever had during combat drills? The mountains around Camp Athena were silent that morning, wrapped in mist thick as breath. But beneath that calm, every candidate felt the storm coming. Colonel Hayes had said the night before, "Tomorrow you stop being students. Tomorrow you lead soldiers." Not simulations, not screens, real men, real doubts. Sarah laced her boots tighter. The leather bit into her ankles, grounding her. 3 months of grueling training had carved her body into endurance and her mind into a machine of calm focus. The woman who once bit her lip through locker room laughter had vanished. But the nerves, those still whispered that she was being tested for more than rank. Outside, helicopters thudded overhead. The candidates lined up, 12 figures in identical fatigues, faces carved by discipline and sleeplessness. Captain Chen gave her a nod across the line, quiet solidarity in that small gesture. "Remember," the captain said under her breath, "they don't expect us to succeed. That's why we have to." Sarah nodded. The trucks rolled out, carrying them toward the valley where a mock city sprawled, rows of concrete buildings, shattered windows, narrow alleys designed for chaos. It looked like a real war zone, minus the smell of death. Their mission brief was simple and impossible. Each candidate would command a squad of 8 soldiers, all volunteers from active units. None of them knew they were taking orders from women. Sarah studied the faces of the men who would test her more than any exercise could. Specialists, corporals, one staff sergeant with the eyes of someone who'd seen real battle. Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson, weathered, calm, observant. When she introduced herself, silence answered. "Good morning, gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Martinez. I'll be your commanding officer for this exercise." A few exchanged glances. Thompson's jaw shifted slightly, professional, not impressed. Sarah spread the map on a vehicle hood. "Our objective, retake Building Alpha, clear it, secure it, hold it. Assume civilians may be present. Limited ammo. We move at 900. She traced routes with her gloved finger, speaking clearly but not shouting. When she finished, she looked up. "Questions?" Thompson raised his hand. "Extraction plan, ma'am, if we hit heavy resistance." A good question, respectful tone. He was probing, not undermining, but measuring. Sarah leaned closer to the map. 2 fallback positions here and here. If we're cut off, we regroup at Overwatch Point Bravo. Clear. He nodded, the others followed. That small nod, earned, not given, settled her heartbeat. The operation began. The mock city swallowed them whole, its alleys thick with smoke and silence. Sarah's radio crackled once, then steadied. Every sound mattered, the click of safeties, the distant shout of an opposing force. "Movement, 2nd floor, 12 o'clock," whispered Davis, the youngest in the squad. Sarah signaled for cover, assessing the angle. The sun flashed off a scope, enemy role player, ready to pin them. "Davis, Rodriguez suppressing fire on that window," she ordered. "Thompson, flank left with Jenkins and Williams. I'll take Peterson and Morrison. We'll breach from the adjacent building." Orders snapped out cleanly. The men moved without hesitation. As she entered the neighboring structure, glass crunched under her boots. Her heart beat steady. She gestured silent commands: advance, hold, breach. The door splintered open. A burst of simulated gunfire. Sarah ducked, returning fire, clearing the room corner by corner. When it was over, silence again. "Window neutralized," came Thompson's voice over comms. "Copy," she replied, exhaling. When they regrouped, Thompson glanced at her, not with skepticism but something closer to respect. "Good call on the flank, ma'am. I'd have gone frontal." "Frontals are for people who like bullet holes," she said, and he actually smiled. They moved deeper into the mock city. Each street held new traps, hidden snipers, ambush drills, civilians planted to test moral judgment. Sarah adjusted tactics fluidly, never letting the adrenaline outrun her thought. By mid-afternoon, the men no longer questioned her tone, her pauses, or her presence. They listened because she made sense, because every order had weight and reason. At 1500 hours, they reached Building Alpha. Intel said the enemy occupied the top floors with hostages simulated inside. Thompson crouched beside her, studying the building through binoculars. "Ma'am, main entrance is suicide." "I know," she murmured. "That's why we won't use it." She drew quick lines on her map. Diversion team hits the front. Assault team repels from the roof. We draw their eyes one way and strike from above. Thompson gave a low whistle. "Risky." "Calculated," she corrected. Minutes later, the plan unfolded in motion. Smoke grenades burst. Gunfire erupted from the diversion. The real strike descended like thunder from the sky, fast, precise, surgical. When the building was cleared, not one simulated casualty. Back at base, Sarah stripped off her gloves and leaned against the truck. From inside, she overheard 2 soldiers talking. "Didn't think she'd pull it off," one said, "but damn, she did." "Yeah, she's good, real good." Sarah didn't smile, but the words sank deep. They weren't just praise, they were validation carved through performance, not politics. That night, Colonel Hayes addressed all 12 candidates in the debrief hall. "Today," she said, "you proved something the world still doubts, that leadership has no gender. What you did out there wasn't about proving women can fight. It was about proving you can lead." The room was silent. No applause, no cheers, just the quiet of exhausted pride. When Sarah returned to her quarters, her hands still trembled from the adrenaline that had yet to fade. She thought about her grandfather again, the way his eyes had shone when he'd said, "Courage isn't loud." Maybe he'd been wrong about one thing. Sometimes courage needed to be loud, loud enough for the world to hear it in the silence that followed. The following weeks at Camp Athena blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion and revelation. Sleep became a rumor, comfort a memory. Every drill peeled away layers of weakness until all that remained was instinct. But the tone shifted one morning when Colonel Hayes entered the strategy room with a tight expression. "The Pentagon's accelerating our schedule," she announced. "Your final evaluation will happen 2 months early. Senior officials will be watching, General Patricia Morrison among them. The name carried weight, a legend, one of the highest-ranking female officers in the Army. Hayes continued, "This is it, the final exercise, 48 hours. You'll each command a company of over 100 soldiers. You'll make tactical decisions in real time with no oversight. Every success and failure will determine the future of this program." Silence blanketed the room. Sarah felt the familiar pulse of anxiety, but beneath it, resolve. That night, while others reviewed manuals, she wrote a letter to her grandfather. She didn't know if she'd send it, but she needed the words out of her. "Abuelo, tomorrow I'll lead more soldiers than I've ever met in one place. I'm terrified, but I'm ready. You said courage isn't the absence of fear. I understand that now." She folded the note and tucked it into her breast pocket. The exercise began before dawn. Frost bit at her cheeks as she stood before her company, 120 soldiers waiting for her command, some skeptical, some curious, all watching. General Morrison observed from a distant mobile HQ, binoculars raised, expression unreadable. Sarah drew a deep breath. Mission parameters: secure the mountain pass, protect civilian evacuees, gather enemy intel, we move in 10. The first hours flowed flawlessly. Her company advanced through treacherous terrain, established perimeter defenses, coordinated logistics. Every command delivered steady and sure. Then chaos. Simulated chemical attack. 3 platoons hit simultaneously. Communications jammed. Enemy contact from 2 directions. Her mind split into layers of control, triaging chaos, issuing orders, scanning maps, reading faces. "Ma'am, we're stretched too thin," warned Captain Williams, one of her platoon leaders. "Recommend consolidating forces." Sarah met his eyes. He wasn't challenging her. He was testing her leadership under pressure. "Negative," she said evenly. "If we consolidate, civilians die and the high ground is lost. We hold positions. I'll reallocate 2nd Platoon for flank support. Trust the plan." He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Moments later, the radio crackled alive with updates. Her orders worked. Civilians protected. Enemy pushed back. Hours passed. Exhaustion gnawed at everyone, but she refused to show it. True command, she realized, wasn't about shouting over chaos. It was about being the calm at its center. Then came the final test. Intel reported a fortified enemy position blocking the only evacuation route. Simulated artillery was en route. Time, 2 hours. Every instinct screamed that splitting her forces would be suicide, but saving civilians meant taking that risk. She studied the map, then looked up at her officers. "We're not choosing between the mission and the people," she said quietly. "We're going to use one to achieve the other." The plan was bold, reckless, some would say. She ordered the armored convoy carrying civilians to move directly past the enemy fortifications. The convoy itself would serve as mobile cover for the infantry assault team. Thompson's voice came through the comms. "Ma'am, that's either genius or crazy." Sarah smiled faintly. "We'll find out soon." When the first shots rang out, she gave the order, "Execute." Armored vehicles rumbled forward, drawing enemy fire. Under their thunderous cover, her troops advanced, flanking and clearing positions one by one. Dust and smoke filled the pass, but within minutes, radio reports confirmed. Objectives secured, convoy safe, minimal casualties. From the command post, General Morrison lowered her binoculars and smiled. 2 days later, the exercise ended. Sarah stood before General Morrison for her debrief. "Lieutenant Martinez," the general began, "that was one of the most innovative operations I've seen in 20 years. You showed adaptability, restraint, and courage. Most importantly, your soldiers trusted you." Sarah straightened, hands clasped behind her back. "Thank you, ma'am." Morrison held up a tablet. "Do you want to know what they said about you?" Sarah hesitated. Yes, ma'am. Staff Sergeant Thompson. She's the kind of officer who makes you want to be a better soldier. Captain Williams. Leadership isn't about rank, it's about competence. She has both. Sarah blinked hard, swallowing the emotion that rose unexpectedly. The general closed the file. We'll see what the Pentagon decides, but no matter what they choose, you've proven something important. Sarah nodded slowly. That gender doesn't determine leadership, ma'am. Exactly, Morrison said. Now let's see if Washington is ready to believe it. That night Sarah sat alone under the mountain sky. The stars burned cold and endless above Camp Athena. Somewhere far away, bureaucrats would decide whether her future existed. But here, in this stillness, she already knew the answer. She walked through laughter, doubt, exhaustion, and fear. And now she had become the one thing they said she could never be. Not just a soldier, a leader. What happens after victory, when silence replaces gunfire? Camp Athena no longer rang with the clash of drills or shouted orders. Instead, a heavy stillness hung over the mountains, the kind that followed storms too powerful to describe. For 2 days straight, Sarah and the other 11 women had commanded companies through hellish simulations. Now they waited for judgment. The air outside the main hall tasted like frost and uncertainty. Word spread that General Morrison was in constant communication with the Pentagon. Some said the program would be hailed as revolutionary. Others whispered it would be buried to avoid controversy. Sarah didn't know which rumor frightened her more. Inside the mess hall, the women gathered quietly, exhaustion etched into every movement. The unity that had carried them through training now felt fragile, held together by hope alone. Captain Lisa Chen broke the silence first. You realize none of this is about us anymore, she murmured. It's politics now. Politics can't erase what we did, Sarah replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Lieutenant Rodriguez sighed. They can bury it deep enough that no one ever knows. Sarah stared at her reflection in the dark coffee before her. Then we'll carry it anyway. They all fell silent again. The sound of a spoon clinking against metal was louder than any gunfire had been during the simulations. Hours turned into days. Colonel Hayes kept her distance, her usual steel-eyed confidence replaced with unreadable restraint. Something was happening behind closed doors, something big. Sarah tried to distract herself with routine, morning runs, field reports, reviewing tactical notes that no longer mattered, but the uncertainty gnawed at her, like a wound that refused to heal because no one would name it. On the 5th morning, she was ordered to the debriefing hall. When she entered, General Morrison stood at the podium, flanked by several high-ranking officers Sarah didn't recognize. Behind them, a video screen displayed the seal of the Department of Defense. The general's voice carried the tone of someone used to delivering news that changed lives. Ladies, she began, you've all performed beyond expectation. The data, the evaluations, the soldier feedback, everything points to success. You've proven that women can command under pressure with exceptional results. A collective exhale rippled through the room. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to breathe deeply. But Morrison wasn't finished. Her expression darkened. However, the Pentagon's final decision is not as straightforward as we hoped. The screen flickered to life. A male voice, distant, formal, almost mechanical, filled the room. Due to ongoing political and cultural considerations, the Advanced Leadership Development Program will not be expanded or continued at this time. The words hit harder than any explosion Sarah had ever heard. Around her, shoulders sagged, breath caught, eyes closed. Success denied its name. Morrison's jaw tightened. That said, the voice continued, the Secretary of Defense has authorized immediate promotion for all 12 candidates to Officer Candidate School. Upon completion, each will receive active leadership assignments in combat units. The transmission ended. The silence afterward was deafening. Captain Chen leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "So, they're shutting it down but promoting us." Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her tone even. "Yes, the program's data will be classified. Officially, this never existed, but your promotions are real." Sarah stared at the floor. She couldn't decide if she felt proud or hollow. The room erupted, not in cheers but murmurs, disbelief, restrained anger. Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke up, frustration breaking through her composure. "They're rewarding us just enough to keep the story quiet." Morrison didn't deny it. "That's likely true, but what matters is that each of you will step into real command. You'll carry what you learned here into the world. That's how change survives, quietly." Sarah raised her hand. "Ma'am, what happens to everything we documented? The research, the after-action reports, the field evaluations?" Morrison's expression turned grave. "Classified, archived, unacknowledged." "Then it dies in a file cabinet?" Sarah asked softly. The general's eyes softened. "Not if you live it." Those words stayed with her long after the briefing ended. The following days at Camp Athena were a blur of paperwork and quiet goodbyes. The camaraderie that had once defined them now carried a bittersweet edge. Every glance between the women held unspoken understanding. They had built something extraordinary, and now they were watching it be sealed away. On the night before their departure, Sarah found herself standing outside the barracks, staring up at the mountains bathed in moonlight. Captain Chen joined her, hands tucked into her jacket pockets. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd failed?" Sarah considered. Maybe nothing would have changed. Maybe that's why they wanted us to fail, to prove the old rules still worked. Chen smiled faintly. "Instead, we succeeded too well." They stood in silence for a while, watching the shadows shift over the ridges. Rodriguez approached from behind them. "The next generation won't wonder if women can lead," she said quietly. "They'll know, because we did it first." Sarah nodded. "Even if no one writes our names down." When they finally went inside, the common room was alive with soft laughter. Someone had managed to find an old speaker, and faint music played. A song without words, just melody and memory. Colonel Hayes entered, carrying a small box. "Ladies," she said, "before you leave, there's something you should have." She opened the box and handed each of them a coin, small, heavy, engraved with the emblem of Camp Athena and two words: strength, silence. "This program may not exist on paper," Hayes said, "but what you did here deserves to be remembered. Keep these as proof that you changed something, whether the world knows it or not." Sarah closed her hand around the coin. The metal was cold, but it pulsed with warmth from within her palm. That night she couldn't sleep. She wrote another letter to her grandfather. "Abuelo, they said the program succeeded but won't continue. I don't know how to feel. I thought victory would taste sweeter, but maybe real change never announces itself. Maybe it just begins quietly in people who refuse to forget what they've seen." She signed it, folded it neatly, and placed it beside her notebook, the same one that had held her doubts during basic training. Morning came with the low hum of helicopters. The 12 women assembled in the mess hall one last time, uniforms pressed, eyes clear despite the sleepless night. Colonel Hayes addressed them with uncharacteristic softness. "When history finally tells your story, it'll say you were the first. Maybe not officially, maybe not in the books, but you'll know, and sometimes that's enough." Sarah looked around at the faces she'd come to trust, the soldiers who had become sisters. Each had walked through their own ridicule, their own fire, and emerged steel. As she boarded the helicopter, she turned for one last look at Camp Athena. The wind from the blades whipped her hair across her face, carrying with it the echoes of shouted commands and distant laughter. She didn't raise her hand to salute. She didn't need to. The place would live in her, not in ceremony but in memory. The chopper lifted, rising above the trees. Below, the compound grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. The mountains receded, and with them went the secrecy that had defined her life for nearly a year. Ahead lay something bigger, something real. Officer Candidate School. Fort Benning. 3 months later, Sarah stood at attention on a wide parade field beneath the Georgia sun. The ceremony was short but unforgettable. Her name, Second Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, rang across the loudspeakers. She saluted, accepted her insignia, and felt the weight of it anchor her shoulders. Afterward, she found herself alone on the steps of the administration building, staring at the horizon. She could hear her grandfather's voice again, carried by the wind. "Strength isn't loud, Mija. It's what you do when no one believes you can." When she reported to Fort Bragg weeks later, her new platoon awaited her. 30 soldiers, some seasoned, some new, most skeptical. As she walked toward them, a wave of quiet rippled through the ranks. The kind she'd known all her life, the silence before judgment. She stopped in front of them, adjusted her cap, and spoke with the steady confidence she'd earned through fire. "Good morning, I'm Lieutenant Martinez. I'll be your platoon leader." A few glances exchanged, a cough in the back. "I know some of you have questions about serving under a female officer," she continued. "That's fair. What I can promise you is simple. I've trained for this position. I've earned it. I'll make mistakes and I'll own them. But I'll never ask you to do something I wouldn't do myself, and I'll never put politics above your safety." The silence stretched. Then Staff Sergeant Johnson, a grizzled veteran with 3 tours behind him, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, voice even, "we're ready to get to work." The relief that washed through her was invisible but immense. As the men dispersed to prepare for drills, Sarah remained still for a moment, watching them. She realized that leadership wasn't about titles or recognition. It was about the quiet exchange between those who followed and those who refused to give up on earning that trust. She reached into her pocket and felt the Camp Athena coin pressing against her palm. Strength, silence. It wasn't a slogan, it was her life. That evening, when she stood before her platoon as they assembled for night training, the wind picked up, carrying faint laughter from the barracks. For a moment, it reminded her of Fort Jackson, the laughter that once mocked her. But this time she smiled. Because laughter no longer haunted her, it followed her. And somewhere deep down she knew they weren't laughing at her anymore. They were laughing with her because she had already won. As the sun dipped below the horizon, her voice carried over the field. "Formation, move." Boots thundered in unison, echoing across the dirt, each step a testament to the path she had walked, through ridicule, through silence, through fire. And when the wind shifted, it carried one last truth across the twilight. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the air feel different the night before her first mission? The base was quiet, but the silence wasn't peace, it was pressure. Fort Bragg's hangars glowed under floodlights, and the smell of oil, dust, and metal carried a kind of memory. Sarah stood at the edge of the tarmac, watching C-130s crouched like beasts in the dark. Tomorrow, her platoon would fly east for their first deployment. It wasn't war yet, not officially. But the briefing had used the words "unstable region" often enough that everyone understood what that meant. Her orders were clear. Provide humanitarian escort for an aid convoy moving through a region torn by insurgent ambushes. Simple on paper, deadly in reality. Inside the barracks, soldiers packed gear, cleaned rifles, shared nervous jokes. Sarah's second-in-command, Staff Sergeant Johnson, approached with a clipboard. "Ma'am, manifests complete. We roll at 500. She nodded, scanning his face. "How's morale?" He shrugged. "Some jitters. First mission under a new LT always gets people talking." "Talking good or talking bad?" she asked. He gave a faint grin. "Talking curious, they don't know you yet." "Then we'll let the mission do the introductions," she said. When he left, she sat on her bunk and unrolled her grandfather's dog tags from the pocket of her duffel. The metal was worn smooth from years of touch. "You, tell me not to overthink," she whispered. "Just lead." Sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the mountains of Camp Athena, heard the rotors beating above the tree line, felt the weight of decisions that changed lives. This time, the decisions wouldn't be simulated. Morning arrived sharp and cold. The platoon assembled on the airstrip in full kit, 30 soldiers lined in disciplined symmetry. Sarah walked the line, meeting each set of eyes. Some greeted her with polite nods, others avoided her gaze. Trust wasn't built by salutes, it was earned in the field. "Listen up," she said, voice steady but not loud. "Our mission is to escort humanitarian trucks to a refugee outpost 80 clicks from base. The route's narrow, the threat level moderate. Rules of engagement are defensive only. I don't care about politics out there. I care about everyone getting home alive." A few heads nodded. The wind carried the sound of engines warming. At 600, the convoy rolled out. The road carved through farmland and low hills, open terrain that left them exposed. Sarah rode in the lead Humvee, headset pressed against her ear, scanning the horizon. Johnson sat beside her, map folded on his knee. "Feels too quiet," he muttered. "Quiet is just noise waiting," she replied. 2 hours in, they reached a valley where the road narrowed between cliffs. The convoy slowed. The terrain was textbook ambush country. Sarah keyed the radio. All units eyes up, switched to staggered formation. She could almost feel the tension ripple through the line of vehicles. Then, as the last truck entered the pass, the world shattered. A deafening explosion tore through the rear. The convoy lurched to a stop. Black smoke spiraled upward. "Contact rear vehicle hit," Johnson shouted. Sarah's training took over. First and second squads establish perimeter. Johnson, get medics to the blast site. Third squad, cover the ridge. Gunfire cracked from above. Dirt erupted near her boots. She dove behind the engine block, returning fire in controlled bursts. The air filled with the metallic scent of cordite and fear. Through the chaos, her radio screamed with overlapping voices. "Ma'am, we've got wounded. Enemy positions at 2 o'clock. Requesting air support." "No air today," she muttered. "We're it." She crawled to the rear truck where flames licked at twisted metal. 2 soldiers pulled a wounded driver from the wreck. "We've got him, ma'am," one yelled. Sarah crouched beside the man. His uniform was torn, leg bleeding badly. "Tourniquet now," she ordered. Her hands didn't shake as she tied the strap, but her heart hammered hard enough to bruise ribs. Another explosion thundered across the ridge, smaller this time, a mortar round impacting wide. "Martinez, they're adjusting fire," Johnson shouted. "Then we move before they find the range." She grabbed her radio. "All units on my mark, smoke cover and advance to the eastern slope. We flank the ridge. Go." Colored smoke grenades burst into plumes, swallowing the road in chaos. Under cover of haze, her soldiers sprinted for the hillside. Sarah led from the front, rifle tight against her shoulder. Halfway up, she heard movement ahead, enemy silhouettes darting between rocks. Without thinking, she dropped to one knee, sighted and fired. The figure fell. Another retreated. Johnson's voice came through the headset, rough and urgent. "They're breaking off, ma'am." "Hold positions," she commanded. "Secure the ridge." Minutes stretched like hours, but eventually the firing ceased. The valley fell eerily quiet except for the hiss of burning fuel and the groans of the wounded. Sarah stood slowly, scanning the ridgeline. Her chest rose and fell with the aftershock of adrenaline. She could feel every heartbeat in her throat. "Casualty report," she said into her mic. "2 wounded, none KIA," came the reply. Relief hit like air after drowning. When medevac helicopters finally thundered in, the dust they kicked up blinded her for a moment. She wiped her face with a gloved hand and exhaled. Johnson approached, his uniform streaked with soot. "Hell of a first day, ma'am." "Could have been worse," she said quietly. He nodded. "You kept your head, they saw that." She looked back at the convoy, at the faces peering from behind helmets. They were exhausted, shaken, but alive. For the first time since the ambush, Sarah allowed herself a long breath. "Pack up," she ordered. "We still have aid to deliver." By nightfall, they reached the refugee outpost. The civilians waiting there, families in threadbare clothing, children clutching faded blankets, rushed toward the convoy as the trucks unloaded supplies. Sarah stood at the edge of the compound, watching her soldiers distribute food and water. She expected relief, but instead felt a hollow ache in her chest. She had led people through fire, saved lives, done everything right. Yet all she could think about was how close they'd come to losing everything. When Johnson approached, she didn't turn. "You ever get used to it?" she asked softly. "To what?" "The sound, the silence after." He shook his head. "No, you just learn to breathe through it." They stood side by side as night fell, the stars faint through the smoke-stained air. Back at base, reports piled up, debriefs, logistics, endless forms that reduced chaos to numbers, but the talk in the barracks was different now. "She doesn't freeze," one soldier said. "Smart under fire," another added. "Didn't think I'd say this, but she's solid." Sarah overheard none of it, yet she felt the change in the air. The silence that once carried judgment now carried respect. Weeks turned into months. Each patrol blurred into the next. She learned to balance compassion with command, patience with pressure. When younger soldiers faltered, she saw echoes of her old self, the girl standing outside a locker room, listening to laughter. One evening, while reviewing maps, Johnson handed her a folded piece of paper. "Mail drop came in. Looks like a letter for you." She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Mija, your mother tells me you're deployed now. I'm proud, though the news makes my old heart race. Remember what I told you, courage isn't loud. But sometimes the world needs to hear it anyway. If fear ever sits beside you, offer it a seat. Lead with it. It'll follow. Abuela." Her throat tightened. She read it twice before tucking it into her pocket next to the Camp Athena coin. A month later, orders came down for a joint operation, larger scale, higher stakes. Her platoon would secure a communications relay in contested territory. The night before departure, she gathered the squad in the briefing tent. Maps glowed under red light. "Tomorrow won't be easy," she said. "The terrain's rough, visibility low. We'll move before dawn and hold until extraction. Remember, discipline keeps us alive." A private raised his hand. "Ma'am, if things go sideways." Sarah looked at him steadily. "Then we adapt, same as always." Her calm wasn't an act anymore. It was instinct. When the meeting ended, Johnson lingered. "You know, ma'am," he said quietly, "you've changed a lot since Fort Bragg." She smiled faintly. "So have you." He nodded. "That ambush, the way you handled it, the men talk about it like legend." Sarah exhaled slowly. "I don't want legend, Sergeant. I want them to make it home." Dawn broke like fire across the horizon as they moved out. The operation unfolded smoothly at first, silent advance, minimal resistance. But halfway through the valley approach, comms began to fail. Static, distorted voices. "Signals jammed," Johnson reported. "Then we go old school," Sarah replied. "Hand signals only." They pushed forward, weaving through broken terrain until the relay station came into view, an abandoned radio tower surrounded by crumbling walls. No movement, no gunfire, just wind. "Feels wrong," murmured a corporal. Sarah raised a hand. "Hold." Then a flash, small metallic, tripwire. "Down," she shouted. The explosion wasn't massive, but close enough to throw dust and bodies into the air. When her hearing cleared, she saw two soldiers on the ground, one clutching his arm, the other groaning. "Medic," she yelled. The enemy opened fire from concealed positions along the ridge. Chaos again. She crawled behind a slab of concrete, her pulse drumming, every nerve alive. The world narrowed to angles, distances, timing. "Johnson," she called through the static, "I need suppression fire north ridge. Move second team right, cover the wounded." "Copy." Bullets sliced the air. Sarah pressed her back against the wall, breathing in short bursts. For a heartbeat, fear tried to find a home inside her. She let it sit, just like her grandfather said. Then she pushed it aside and moved. She sprinted toward a downed soldier, dragging him behind cover as rounds tore through the dust. When she looked up again, she caught sight of Johnson signaling, enemy flank exposed. She gave the order, execute. Her team surged forward, coordinated and precise. Within minutes, the ridge was silent again. When it was over, she leaned against the wall, chest heaving. The radio hissed softly before clearing. "Ridge secure, ma'am," Johnson reported. "Copy," she said, voice steady. "Good work." The relay tower loomed above her, battered but standing, like every soldier around her. For the first time since landing in this country, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Because leadership wasn't just surviving the ambush. It was facing the next dawn, ready to do it all again. That night, under a sky streaked with ash and stars, she sat beside the radio tower, helmet resting on her knee. The wind carried faint laughter from the camp below, her soldiers joking around a fire, alive, unwinding. It reminded her of something she once hated. But now she understood. Laughter was survival. It was proof that, even in war, humanity refused to die. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet promise to the dark. "I'll keep them laughing." How far should a soldier go before obedience turns into betrayal? The question came quietly at first, carried not by orders but by screams. It was 3 weeks after the relay tower mission when command assigned her platoon to a joint operation near the border. Officially, the mission was to extract an intelligence officer trapped behind insurgent lines. Unofficially, whispers said the area housed civilians, families caught between two advancing forces. Sarah read the briefing twice. The words were clinical, stripped of faces and context, collateral presence possible. She folded the papers and met Johnson's eyes across the planning table. "This isn't a clean op." He didn't ask why. "When is it ever?" "Still," she murmured, "something feels off. We're being told to clear an area that might not be empty." Johnson studied her. "Orders are orders, ma'am." She nodded, though her gut disagreed. Orders might win wars, but they could also bury souls. The morning of the mission arrived cold and colorless. Dawn had barely touched the horizon when her platoon advanced through fog that clung to the valley floor. The radio crackled with intermittent updates from higher command. Priority 1, recover the intel package. Civilian interference not mission critical. Sarah hated that phrase, civilian interference, as if lives could be measured in briefings. The convoy halted near the coordinates. The terrain was sparse, mud huts, low stone walls, the distant bleating of goats. No movement, no gunfire. "Area looks abandoned," Johnson reported. "Or waiting," she replied. They moved cautiously, clearing each structure. Dust rose from the floors like ghosts. Then they heard it, a muffled cry. Sarah froze. "Hold." The sound came again, faint but human. She motioned toward a small hut at the end of the alley. Two soldiers pried open the wooden door. Inside, huddled in the shadows, were a woman and 3 children, their eyes wide, their bodies trembling. The woman raised her hands. "Please," she whispered in broken English. "No soldiers, only family." Sarah lowered her rifle immediately. "We're not here to hurt you." Johnson's voice came over comms. "Ma'am, command just radioed. Drone feed shows movement east of your position. They want an immediate sweep. Sarah looked back at the civilians. Negative, she said. There are non-combatants here. Command says sweep anyway. She clenched her jaw. Tell Command I'll handle it my way. Johnson hesitated, understood. She turned to the woman. You need to leave this area now. There's going to be fighting. The woman shook her head. No place to go. Sarah looked around, the children, the fear, the helplessness. She felt that same tightness in her chest that she'd felt during basic training, when laughter had replaced understanding. Only this time, the cost wasn't pride, it was lives. Johnson, she said, get the trucks ready. We're taking them with us. Ma'am, that's against protocol. I'm aware. Command not gonna like it. They can file a complaint after everyone's alive. He gave a small, resigned nod. Copy that. Minutes later, the platoon rolled out, civilians in the rear vehicle. Sarah rode shotgun, scanning the ridgelines for movement. At first, everything was still. Then came the sharp ping of incoming rounds. Ambush right flank, someone yelled. The convoy erupted into motion. Sarah grabbed the radio. All units, defensive positions. Get that rear truck shielded. Bullets clattered off armor as her soldiers returned fire. The sound filled the valley like a storm of metal and fury. Through the chaos, Sarah saw a flash of movement, a figure carrying a launcher atop the ridge. She leaned out the window, sighted, fired once. The figure vanished. RPG neutralized, Johnson reported. Good, keep moving. After 15 endless minutes, the shooting died away. The convoy broke free of the valley, speeding toward open terrain. When the dust settled, they'd lost no soldiers. The civilians were shaken but alive. Sarah exhaled hard. Her hands trembled as she lowered the radio. Back at base, the debrief was short and sharp. The battalion executive officer, Major Harlan, paced behind his desk like a man looking for a target. Lieutenant Martinez, explain why you deviated from mission protocol. Sir, we encountered civilians in the target area. That wasn't your directive. No, sir, but leaving them there would have gotten them killed. That wasn't your call to make. With respect, sir, it was my responsibility to protect lives under my command. Those people were in our line of fire. Harlan's jaw tightened. You compromised operational secrecy for humanitarian optics. That's not leadership, it's recklessness. Sarah's voice stayed calm. If saving lives is reckless, sir, then I'll take the risk. He stopped packing, eyes narrowing. You're lucky the colonel's impressed with your field record. Otherwise, you'd be facing a reprimand, dismissed. Sarah saluted and walked out, heartbeat steady. She wasn't angry, she was certain. Outside, Johnson waited near the trucks. Well, no reprimand, she said. Good, you did the right thing. She looked back at the headquarters building. Then why doesn't it feel like victory? He didn't answer. Some questions weren't meant for the chain of command. That night, Sarah sat alone in the motor pool, the hum of generators filling the air. She replayed the moment she'd seen the children's faces, the raw, wordless fear. It haunted her, not because of what she'd done, but because of what the system expected her to ignore. She thought of her grandfather again. You can follow orders and still lose yourself. Maybe this was what he'd meant. A soft voice broke the silence. Ma'am. It was Private Davis, the youngest in her platoon, barely 20. Everything okay, Davis? He hesitated. I just wanted to say what you did today, it mattered. Those kids would have died. She smiled faintly. Thank you, get some rest. He nodded and left. For a long moment, Sarah stared at the empty doorway. Maybe the army wouldn't remember today, but Davis would. The civilians would, and that was enough. Weeks later, she was summoned again, this time by Colonel Raines, the brigade commander. He didn't waste time. Martinez, you've been cited for exceptional leadership under fire. Despite operational deviation, your judgment prevented civilian casualties and maintained unit cohesion. Command wants you for an upcoming joint task force." Sarah blinked, "Sir." He smiled slightly. "You made noise, Lieutenant, the kind that reaches ears higher than mine. You're being reassigned Forward Command Post Integrated Operations. Congratulations." The weight of his words hit her slowly. Recognition, real official, not applause but acknowledgement. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me," Rain said. "Just keep proving you're right." Her new post was harsher, higher altitude, colder nights. The forward base perched on a mountainside, surrounded by fog thick as concrete. She arrived at dusk. The soldiers she joined were mixed branch infantry, logistics, intel. Many had heard rumors of her past missions. Some looked curious, others skeptical. The unit's captain, a tall man named Keener, greeted her briskly. "So you're the one from Bragg, the civilian saver." Sarah kept her voice even. "I prefer the term leader, sir." He smirked. "Let's hope your conscience doesn't slow us down." That night she unpacked in silence, anger flickering beneath her composure. She wasn't here to argue reputations. She was here to lead. Days turned into nights blurred by constant operations. Sarah found herself responsible for coordinating evacuation routes, resupply runs, and intel relay. Each decision was a balancing act between compassion and command. Her platoon, still under her leadership, trusted her completely now. Johnson remained her anchor, unflinching as ever. But Captain Keener's doubt lingered like static. During one tense planning session, he dismissed her recommendation to delay a strike until civilians cleared a nearby village. "We can't stall every mission for moral hesitation," he snapped. Sarah met his gaze evenly. "And we can't win hearts and minds by burning villages." The room fell silent. Keener scowled. "You've got guts, Lieutenant. Let's hope they don't get people killed." "Only if we stop listening to them," she replied. The argument ended there, but the tension didn't. That night rain hammered the base roofs. Sarah sat at her desk writing in her notebook, the same one she'd carried since Fort Jackson. Pages filled with cramped handwriting, lines of exhaustion and reflection. "We fight two wars, the one outside and the one inside. The first decides who lives. The second decides who we become." She paused, staring at the ink until it blurred. A knock at the door. "Come in." Johnson stepped inside, drenched, holding a folded message. "New orders, ma'am. Priority intercept mission. High-value courier moving through the canyon at dawn. Captain Keener's leading, but he requested your support." Sarah frowned. "Requested." His words. If she's going to question everything, she might as well see how real command works. Her jaw tightened. "Then let's show him." Before sunrise they assembled near the canyon mouth. The rain hadn't stopped. Mud clung to boots, gear, breath. Keener reviewed the plan: direct ambush, quick extraction. "Keep it clean, people." Sarah scanned the terrain, narrow, rocky, with a small cluster of huts nearby. "Locals?" she asked. "Abandoned," he said dismissively. She wasn't convinced. As the operation began, her instinct screamed something was wrong. The courier convoy arrived too early, moving too slow, headlights dim. She squinted through rain. "That's not military," she whispered. "That's children." Her blood ran cold. "Hold fire," she shouted into comms. But Keener's voice cut across hers. "Engage." The first burst of gunfire tore through the mist. Sarah sprinted forward, waving frantically. "Cease fire, civilians, cease fire." Her voice cracked through chaos, echoed by Johnson yelling the same. The firing stopped, leaving only the sound of rain and crying. When they reached the convoy, it was clear. A group of displaced families, no weapons, just terror. Keener stood frozen, realization dawning too late. Sarah turned on him, fury controlled but sharp as steel. You didn't verify, you assumed. He opened his mouth, closed it again. We move these people to safety, she said. Now. He didn't argue. By nightfall, reports of the incident reached command. Keener filed a statement admitting tactical misjudgment. Sarah's own report detailed how quick identification prevented loss of life. No reprimands, no medals, just silence. But within her platoon, something changed forever. When soldiers talked about leadership now, they didn't speak of rank or courage. They spoke of her voice breaking through the gunfire. And that was enough. That evening, Sarah wrote one final note in her journal before sleep claimed her. Sometimes the battlefield isn't a place, it's a decision, the kind you make when no one else will. She closed the notebook, tucked it beside her pillow, and whispered into the darkness. Tomorrow I'll lead again. The rain outside answered softly, like applause from ghosts who understood. What happens when loyalty demands silence, but truth demands a voice? For weeks, the incident at the canyon lingered like smoke that refused to clear. Official reports called it a communications lapse. The soldiers who were there knew better. It was a near tragedy stopped only by Sarah's instinct. But command had noticed something else, how she defied orders again and still come out right. The kind of right that made certain officers nervous. It began quietly, a sealed envelope on her bunk. No insignia, no sender, just her name typed cleanly across the front. Inside, a single sheet. Report to Forward Intelligence Command, Sector 7B clearance confirmed. Immediate reassignment. She read it twice, then once more slower. Johnson found her still holding it. Bad news. I don't know, she said honestly, just change. He frowned. Change doesn't knock, it breaks down the door. 2 days later, she arrived at Sector 7B, a walled compound buried deep in mountain fog. No markings, no flags, only quiet professionalism that felt heavier than any uniform. Inside, a woman in plain clothes greeted her. Lieutenant Martinez, I'm Director Kellen. You've been observed for some time. Observed. Your command style, decision-making, instinct under duress. The department believes you're suited for classified field coordination. Sarah studied her carefully. Field coordination meaning. Intelligence liaison, Kellen said smoothly. Joint ops, information movement. You'll assist in identifying rogue logistics, those siphoning supplies to insurgents. It's high-stakes work, discretion required. Understood, Sarah said, though her pulse had quickened. Kellen slid a folder across the table. Your record shows unorthodox judgment. You question orders. Sarah hesitated. I question mistakes. Kellen's lips curved faintly. Good, we need people who see through noise. The director stood. Welcome to the other war, Lieutenant, the one fought in whispers. Training for the assignment was unlike anything she'd known. No drills, no gunfire, just silence and screens. Learning to read faces through pixelation, track patterns through lies, interpret humanity through data. Sarah missed the dirt and chaos of the field, but part of her understood this battlefield was more dangerous. Here, one wrong inference didn't cost ground, it cost truth. After weeks of analysis work, Kellen summoned her late one night. We've traced a logistics breach to an Allied depot, Kellen explained. Supplies rerouted off-record, fuel, munitions, medicine. Someone selling aid for profit. We need evidence. Sarah leaned forward. And you want me to find it? Not just find it, Kellen said. Expose it. She hesitated. Whose depot? Kellen met her eyes. Fort Bragg. For a heartbeat, Sarah couldn't breathe. That was home base. The place she'd trained, where she'd built herself from laughter's echo. Sir, she said quietly, there are good people there. There are good people everywhere, Kellen replied. That's how bad ones hide. Sarah looked down at the folder. And if I find names I know. Then you remember your oath, Kellen said simply. Not to them, to truth. 2 weeks later, Sarah walked the halls of Fort Bragg again, this time not as a soldier but as a quiet observer. Her credentials listed her as Logistics Audit Officer, temporary assignment. The faces were familiar. The smells, too: coffee, oil, sweat, order. She almost felt safe until she remembered why she was there. The file Kellen had given her pointed toward inconsistencies in shipment logs, fuel receipts, convoy manifests. The paper trail led to one department, Operations Support, Division Delta. Its officer in charge, Captain Thomas Keener. Her breath stilled. The same man from the Canyon mission, the one who'd nearly ordered fire on civilians. She stared at his name for a long time, the letters blurring. Fate, it seemed, had an unkind sense of irony. When she entered his office the next morning, he was leaning over a terminal, sleeves rolled up, talking fast into a headset. He turned when she cleared her throat. "Martinez," he said, eyebrows raised. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "Logistics audit," she said evenly. "Routine records review." He smirked. "So they've got you pushing papers now. Guess saving civilians doesn't win medals after all." Sarah kept her tone neutral. "Just here to verify numbers." He shrugged. "You'll find them perfect." But she didn't. Over the next week, she noticed discrepancies, small at first. Fuel reports missing signatures. Medical shipments signed out under code names. Receipts that didn't match timestamps. Every detail seemingly minor, but together they whispered something dark. She compiled everything, cross-checked with convoy logs. The picture emerged slowly. Equipment rerouted under fake relief missions, goods vanishing mid-transport. Each red line connected back to one authorization code, Keener. The realization came with nausea, not victory. She confronted him late one evening in the hangar, rain pouring against the roof. "I know," she said simply. He looked up from a crate manifest, face unreadable. "Know what?" "That you've been rerouting aid shipments, selling them through intermediaries." He chuckled softly. "You've been busy." "Don't," she warned. "Don't act like this is nothing." He closed the folder, stepping closer. "You think you understand how this machine works. You think those supplies were going to make a difference. They vanish in bureaucracy, Martinez. I just make sure they go where they're actually needed." "By needed you mean profitable," she said. He met her eyes coldly. "The world runs on deals, not dreams. And soldiers die in the gaps between them." For a long second they stood in silence. Then he leaned closer. "You could walk away. You've got a good record, a promotion coming. File your report as clerical error. No one gets hurt." She exhaled slowly. "That's not true." "Then you're about to make enemies. You don't understand." She turned to leave. "Maybe, but at least I'll understand myself." The next morning, she submitted her full findings to Director Kellen under secure line. Evidence, records, intercepted communications, everything. Within hours, the compound stirred. Quiet movements, orders passing through encrypted channels. By evening, Keener's office was sealed. He was gone. No confrontation, no handcuffs, just absence like a ghost erased from history. Kellen called her to debrief the next day. "Operation successful," the director said calmly. "Internal affairs handled removal." Sarah's hand stayed folded tightly in her lap. "Handled how?" Kellen's eyes were sharp. "That's not your concern." "Was he arrested?" "Lieutenant," Kellen said softly, "the truth you serve doesn't always fit in reports." The sentence landed heavy. "Then what do we call it?" Sarah asked. "Balance," Kellen replied. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Rain lashed the windows of her quarters as she stared at the ceiling, questions circling her mind. Had she done right? Or had she just traded one kind of silence for another? Her radio buzzed softly, a secure message from an unlisted number. Just 2 words, "Thank you." She stared at it for a long time. No signature. Somewhere, someone knew. Someone who hadn't wanted Keener's corruption exposed publicly, but couldn't let it stay hidden either. Truth in fragments, justice in whispers. It was the other war Kellen had warned her about. Weeks later, she was summoned to Washington. Inside the Pentagon, the corridors were immaculate, sterile, almost holy. She walked them in full dress uniform, medals glinting softly, the weight of secrecy pressing down harder than armor ever had. She entered a small conference room. 3 officers and Director Kellen waited inside. A general spoke first. "Lieutenant Martinez, your performance during recent intelligence operations has been exemplary. Your ability to discern threats without compromising discretion is rare." Sarah stayed silent. Praise felt wrong when laced with classified ghosts. "We're considering you for command of a special operations task unit," the general continued. "Small, mobile, interdisciplinary, officially humanitarian, unofficially containment." Sarah looked at Kellen. Containment of what? Kellen met her gaze. Corruption, misuse, the gray zones war leaves behind. Sarah hesitated. And what happens when truth gets in the way again? Kellen's answer was simple. Then you'll know which war you're fighting. That evening, after the meeting, Sarah stepped outside the Pentagon into soft rain. The city lights reflected in puddles like shattered metals. She pulled her coat tighter and watched the world move in silence. People rushing past, none of them aware of the quiet wars fought behind closed doors. She thought of her grandfather again. Courage isn't always the roar before battle. Sometimes it's the whisper that refuses to fade. Her phone buzzed. A message from Johnson. "Heard you're going places, ma'am. Don't forget the ones who still need leading." She smiled faintly. Never. When she returned to the field months later, her task force was already forming. Diverse, sharp, untested. People who'd seen enough to stop believing in perfection, but not enough to stop trying for it. Their first mission was simple: investigate missing relief shipments in a region declared cleared. The irony wasn't lost on her. Standing before them, Sarah adjusted her uniform. "I won't pretend to have all the answers," she said quietly, "but I've seen what happens when silence wins, so while I'm in command, truth doesn't get buried." No applause followed, just the kind of quiet that meant belief. They moved out. As the convoy rolled through the fog, Sarah sat in the lead vehicle, watching dawn bloom over the horizon. The light cut through the mist, painting the world in fragile gold. She thought of the laughter that had once filled a locker room, the humiliation, the journey that began with silence and ended in command. Every scar, every doubt, every choice, each one had been a teacher. And in that stillness before the next mission began, she whispered to herself, "Sometimes the cost of truth isn't losing friends, it's losing comfort." The wind answered softly, carrying her voice down the road ahead. What if the real betrayal didn't come from the enemy, but from the silence between friends? The new task force, designated Echo 12, was small but formidable. 12 soldiers hand-picked from different branches, each carrying scars no report could document. Their mission profile classified, their purpose undefined. Sarah led them from the front, not with speeches but with steadiness. Trust didn't come from words, it came from how you stood when everything else fell. Their first months were uneventful. Convoy escorts, reconstruction site security, intelligence support, quiet work important but forgettable. Yet Sarah sensed the undercurrent, something hidden beneath routine. Reports delayed, intel redacted, supply shipments rerouted without reason. The same patterns she'd once exposed at Fort Bragg. When she brought it up to Director Kellen via encrypted line, the response was brief. "Observe but do not act. We're tracing higher channels." So she waited, watched, listened. And then one night, observation turned to revelation. It was nearly 200 when the base alarms flickered. No sirens, just the faint buzz of a system half-activated. Sarah left her quarters, weapons slung low, boots echoing on concrete. The operations room, lights glowed dimly. A lone figure hunched over the communications terminal, typing fast. "Corporal Reed," she called softly. The soldier spun, startled, his face pale in the monitor's glow. "Ma'am, I couldn't sleep," he stammered. "Just reviewing transmissions." Sarah stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "At 2 in the morning, using a secured frequency." He froze. On the screen, a message window blinked open. Coordinates, timestamps, coded signatures. She recognized one of the routing numbers instantly. It wasn't Allied. It was Insurgent. "Back away from the console," she said quietly. Reed hesitated. "Ma'am, I can explain." "Now." He lifted his hand slowly and stepped back. Sarah scanned the transmission log. The messages weren't random. They were relays. Someone inside Echo 12 had been feeding information out. Her stomach turned cold. She turned back to him. "Who are you sending this to?" He swallowed hard. "It's not what you think. I'm not a traitor. I'm—" Before he could finish, a shot rang out. The glass wall beside them shattered. Reed dropped instantly, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. Sarah dove for cover, scanning the direction of the shot. A shadow moved across the upper catwalk. "Shooter," she shouted into her radio. "South corridor." Static, no response. She sprinted toward the stairs, heart pounding, boots hammering metal. The shadow vanished through the maintenance door. When she burst outside, rain pelted her face. Darkness swallowed everything beyond a few yards. Footprints in the mud, heavy, hurried. She followed them toward the supply hangar. Inside, the lights flickered weakly. Crates lined the walls like tombstones. She caught a glimpse of movement near the back, someone loading a data drive into a transport case. "Drop it," she ordered. The figure froze, half-turned. And in that split second, her breath caught. It wasn't an insurgent. It was Sergeant Holt, her own communications chief. They served side by side for months. She trusted him with every encrypted order, every classified route. Now he stood there, face unreadable. "You shouldn't have come, ma'am." "Tell me you're not doing this," she said quietly. He exhaled. "It's bigger than this unit, bigger than you or me." "What's in the data?" "Names, operations, proof. The people running this program, Kellen, others, they're selling intelligence to both sides." Sarah's chest tightened. "That's impossible." "Then why do our missions keep overlapping with insurgent ambushes?" he demanded. "How do they always know where we are?" She hesitated. He wasn't lying. His eyes carried the same exhaustion she saw in her mirror every night, the kind that comes from truth no one wants to believe. "Put the drive down," she said gently. "We'll bring this up the right way." "The right way," Holt laughed bitterly. "You think there is one, you report it, it vanishes. You question it, they bury you, you know it's true." She wanted to deny it, but part of her couldn't. "Then what's your plan?" she asked. "I leak it," he said, "to the press, to the world. That'll get people killed. They're dying anyway." His voice cracked on the last word. The rain outside hammered louder. "Holt," she said softly, "you can't fix corruption with chaos. And you can't fix it by pretending silence is strategy." They stood there, two soldiers who had believed in the same mission, now separated by what belief had cost them. Then a distant alarm blared, the sound of approaching security units. Holt looked toward the noise, then back at her. "They'll call me a traitor." "You don't have to be one," she said. He hesitated, just long enough for the floodlights to catch his face. He looked young suddenly, too young for betrayal. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry," and ran. By the time the guards arrived, Holt was gone. The drive, too. Reed's body was taken to the medical tent. No survivors. Sarah spent hours in the command center, reviewing footage, reporting every detail. Kellen called from Washington that night. "You let him escape," she said coldly. Sarah's voice stayed calm. "He killed one of ours and stole intel. I pursued him, but he knew our system. He planned this." Kellen's silence was sharp. "We'll find him. Until then, your unit is suspended from operations. Debrief and stand by." The call ended. Sarah sat there alone, staring at the flickering screen. Holt's words wouldn't leave her. They're selling intelligence to both sides. Could it be true? Could Kellen, the woman who'd recruited her, who'd spoken of balance, really be that cold? She remembered the Keener cover-up, the quiet disappearance, the convenient explanations. The pieces didn't fit right anymore. Days passed. Holt became a ghost story whispered through the base. Officially, he'd deserted under duress. Unofficially, half the soldiers believed him dead. Sarah didn't. She couldn't. Late one night, a coded transmission reached her secure channel. Untraceable source. Single line of text, "Meet me where truth began." Her blood ran cold. That phrase, "truth began," came from her first mission log under Kellen's command. Only two people had access to it, her and Holt. She traced the location embedded in the transmission. It pointed to a small, abandoned checkpoint 2 miles outside the perimeter. Johnson noticed her prepping gear, going somewhere. "Walk," she said. He crossed his arms, a walk with armor and a sidearm. She sighed. "I just need to verify something." He studied her face, then nodded. "I'll be on standby channel." The checkpoint was half swallowed by fog and moonlight when she arrived. Crumbling walls, old sandbags, rusted gates. A shadow moved near the old guard post. "Holt," she called softly. He stepped forward, rifle slung but lowered. His face gaunt, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You came," he said. "Why me?" "Because you still think there's a right way," he said. "I need proof that I'm not crazy." He handed her a data chip. Encrypted logs from Kellen's network. They trace funding back to private contractors, companies paid to extend wars instead of end them. Sarah stared at the chip. "If this is true, it's treason at the highest level." He nodded. "Now you understand why I ran." She slipped the chip into her pouch. "I'll get this out, but not your way." Before he could answer, a burst of gunfire ripped through the night. Holt staggered back, hit once in the shoulder. Sarah dropped beside him, returning fire into the darkness. Shadows advanced, unmarked gear, no insignias, not insurgents, not theirs either. "Extraction," she yelled into her comm. "Under fire, unknown hostiles." Static answered her. She grabbed Holt's arm, dragging him toward cover. "Stay with me." He gritted his teeth. "You can't let them have that data. Save your breath." More rounds tore through the walls. She fired back, calculated, steady, heart hammering. Finally, headlights, vehicles approaching fast. For a second she thought it was backup. Then she saw the markings, Sector 7B. Kellen's unit. But the soldiers didn't lower their weapons. They surrounded the checkpoint, floodlights cutting through the fog. Director Kellen stepped out, expression unreadable. "Lieutenant," she said calmly, "step away from the defector." Sarah stood, chest heaving. "You said Holt was a traitor, but he found proof. You're protecting this." Kellen's eyes softened almost with pity. "You're too good for this world, Martinez. That's your flaw." "Then why recruit me?" "Because purity sells better than power." It hit like a slap. Sarah's voice trembled, but not from fear. "You're weaponizing truth." Kellen tilted her head. "No, I'm managing it." Behind her, soldiers raised their rifles. Sarah lifted her hand slowly. "At least have the courage to admit it's about control." Kellen smiled faintly. "Courage doesn't win wars." Sarah met her gaze. "No, but it ends them." Then she threw the flashbang. Light consumed the darkness. When she came to, she was lying in mud near the forest's edge. Holt was beside her, pale but breathing. The convoy was gone, so was Kellen. The chip was still in her pouch. She touched it, gripping it tight. For the first time since she joined the army, she realized the enemy wasn't foreign. It was invisible and everywhere. By dawn, she reached the base perimeter. Johnson found her stumbling toward the gates, drenched, bleeding from a graze on her arm. "What the hell happened?" he demanded. She pressed the chip into his hand. "Everything we thought we knew, it's a lie." He looked down at it, then at her face. "You're serious." "I need you to trust me," she whispered. "I already do." That night, Sarah sat in the infirmary beside Holt's bed. He was unconscious but alive. Machines beeped softly in rhythm with the rain outside. She stared at her reflection in the window, mud-streaked, eyes hollow, uniform torn. Her voice came out barely audible. "You wanted the world to know. Maybe we can still make that happen." She touched the chip again. Its surface was cold, but inside it pulsed the weight of everything she'd fought for: truth, dignity, conscience. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a soldier. She felt like something else. A witness. A keeper of what must not be forgotten. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. The next storm was coming. And this time, she wouldn't run from it. How much truth can one person carry before it breaks them? For 3 days, rain hammered the base without pause. The storm matched the chaos inside Sarah's mind. Every corridor she walked felt narrower, every shadow heavier. She couldn't tell who to trust anymore, not after what she'd seen. Director Kellen was gone. Holt was recovering but weak. Command had gone silent, too silent. Official memos said Sector 7 be reassigned for internal review. Unofficially, the operation had vanished, erased, like every secret that mattered. But the data chip still existed. And so did Sarah. She spent hours alone in the operations room, replaying Holt's words, the gunfire, the confrontation. The sound of Kellen's voice, "Purity sells better than power," echoed like a curse. Each file she opened, each encrypted layer she cracked, revealed another betrayal. Shipments falsified, funds diverted, lives traded like currency. The machine of war turning on itself. It wasn't the kind of evil that shouted. It whispered quietly, efficiently. By the 4th night, she made her decision. She couldn't hand this over to the system. The system was the problem. But she also couldn't let it leak recklessly. Too many soldiers still in the field. Too many innocents who'd pay the price of exposure. So she planned something else. A confession disguised as a report. Truth coded inside obedience. Johnson found her in the command tent, typing fast. "You've barely slept," he said. "Neither has the world," she murmured. He leaned against the table. "You're thinking of going public, aren't you?" She didn't answer. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "if you cross that line, there's no coming back. You'll lose your rank, your freedom, maybe worse." She stopped typing, looked up. "I swore an oath to protect this country, not the people who poison it." Johnson sighed. "You think they'll let you walk away after this?" "No," she said, "but maybe I don't need to." He stared at her for a long time. "Then tell me what you need." She smiled faintly. "A few good soldiers who remember what right feels like." That night, under the cover of the storm, Sarah and Johnson transferred the files. She encoded the evidence inside routine supply manifests, embedding data across multiple transmissions, untraceable unless someone knew where to look. Then she prepared one final file, a direct message addressed to the Inspector General's office. It carried no names, only patterns, enough to make people ask questions, enough to make silence impossible. When it was done, she sat back, breathing hard. "Once this sends," she said softly, "they'll know." Johnson looked at her. "And you?" "I'll be gone." At dawn, the rain finally stopped. The base glistened under pale sunlight, everything washed clean, except her conscience, which felt heavier than ever. She walked to the infirmary. Holt was awake, bandaged but lucid. "You did it," he rasped. "Not yet," she said, "but soon." He smiled faintly. "You were right, about chaos. So were you. Truth needs noise." He reached out, gripping her hand weakly. "Be careful. You've got something they can't buy, integrity. That scares people like Kellen." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Then let them be afraid." By noon she was gone. Her uniform left neatly folded on the bunk, her insignia resting on top. A note beneath it. Strength silence. No one saw her leave the perimeter. No one stopped her. For 2 days she moved through backroads, safe houses, transport convoys. She learned long ago how to vanish inside the machinery she once served. When she finally reached the coast, the world seemed bigger and lonelier than she remembered. She rented a small room above a fishing pier. No rank, no radio, no uniform. Just the endless hum of waves and the faint smell of salt and rust. Freedom didn't feel like she'd imagined. It wasn't lightness. It was responsibility with no chain of command to share it. At night she'd sit on the balcony, the Camp Athena coin warm in her palm. She thought of the women from that first program, the laughter, the defiance, the unity. She wondered where they were now. Some probably still serving, others long gone. But their legacy lived quietly, hidden under the noise of bigger wars. They had proven something that couldn't be erased, that strength could be silent, and silence could still lead. Weeks passed. The encoded report spread through back channels, military oversight boards, civilian analysts, journalists digging in the dark. Small stories began appearing. Missing aid shipments linked to contract fraud. Anonymous whistleblower exposes supply scandal. Names weren't listed, but the world had begun to listen. And for Sarah, that was enough. Until the morning, she saw the news ticker scroll across the small cafe television. Director of Intelligence Operations under investigation for misuse of classified funds. She froze. Kellen's face appeared on screen, composed, defiant, surrounded by lawyers. It wasn't victory, but it was consequence. Sarah turned off the screen and whispered, "Balance." That evening she walked along the shoreline, boots sinking into the wet sand. The horizon glowed faintly gold, the kind of light that felt like a promise. She closed her eyes, remembering every step that had brought her here. The laughter in the locker room. The humiliation. The long climb through doubt. The ambushes, the civilians, the betrayals. And finally, the truth. All of it had led to this quiet peace that didn't ask to be understood. Behind her footsteps. She turned. Johnson. He looked older, more worn, but his eyes still held that steady calm. "You're a hard woman to find," he said. "You didn't try very hard," she teased. He chuckled. "Command's been looking for you. Officially, they want answers. Unofficially, they're pretending you never existed." She nodded. "That's fine. I got what I needed." He looked at her for a long moment. "You think it'll change anything?" Sarah's gaze drifted to the horizon. "Maybe not today, but somewhere, someone will read those files and remember what we forgot." He smiled faintly, still the idealist. She shook her head. "No, just stubborn." They stood there for a while, the waves whispering between them. Finally Johnson said, "There's talk of a new training initiative. Quiet One, modeled after Camp Athena. They're looking for someone to lead it." Sarah turned to him, surprised. "It's real." He nodded. "Unofficially, yes. Word is, they want someone who understands leadership without politics." Her throat tightened. "You think they'd let me near a uniform again?" "Not if they knew where you were," he said, grinning. "But sometimes the system learns from the people it breaks." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Maybe it's time it learned again." Weeks later, In an unmarked training facility nestled deep in the Rockies, a small group of recruits stood in formation. A woman stepped onto the platform, calm, confident, the wind stirring her hair. No insignia, no title, just presence. "Some of you think leadership means being obeyed," she began. "It doesn't. Leadership means being trusted, and trust comes from what you do when no one's watching." The recruits listened in silence. "My name isn't important," she said. "Just remember this, strength isn't loud. It's what carries you when the world wants you quiet." She paused, eyes scanning their faces. "That's how we win, not with noise but with conviction." Her words settled like dust, quiet but permanent. After the session, she walked out to the ridge overlooking the valley. The air was cold, sharp, alive. From up here, the world looked endless again. She took out her notebook, the same one from Fort Jackson, and opened to the first page. The old ink had faded, but the words were still there. Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She smiled softly. That line had once been pain, now it was a reminder. She added one last entry beneath it. They don't ignore her anymore. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, a helicopter roared in the distance, carrying new recruits to the facility. Sarah stood tall, the wind tugging at her jacket. She reached into her pocket, feeling the Camp Athena coin against her fingers. Strength, silence. The two words that had guided her through everything. She turned them over in her palm and whispered, almost like prayer. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." That night, long after the lights went out, the mountain air carried faint laughter from the barracks below. Not the laughter of mockery this time, but of hope. And Sarah smiled, because the sound no longer reminded her of where she started. It reminded her of how far she'd come.